I don't know why it took me so long, because I always just kind of felt dead inside. You're not building anything, you're not contributing, you're not generating jobs, you're really just cogging the machine. I did 3.5 on my first year.
Welcome to the Franchise Champion Show. I'm Alan Regala, former D1 athlete, Stanford engineer, and franchise owner who built a multi-million-dollar exit. I created this show to help driven professionals find the right franchise and build real wealth on their own terms. My guest today spent years in corporate banking and decided he was done. He went looking for a way out, spent over a year searching, and talked to dozens of brands before finding the one that checked every box. He signed with Cabinet IQ in April of 2024. 1 year later, had a team of over a dozen people, multiple territories, and 7 figures in sales, all while keeping his corporate job. Ryan Colburn, welcome to the Franchise Champion Show.
Thank you, Alan. Good to be here.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to chat with you today. I am excited about your brand and the success that you've had with it, even though you haven't been doing this for that long. Tell me a bit about your background in banking and, what your day-to-day looked like before franchising.
Sure, although I think you're going to have me beat. Former D1 athlete, Stanford engineer. I don't have those credentials, but I went to the University of Florida, majored in finance, and just kind of made my way around some different banks, just typical corporate America. I was specifically in risk management. So, I dealt with different types of risk. At the end of the day, it's all just different risk profiles and evaluating the risk curve and looking at data sets and just typical good old corporate America stuff. And I just got a little tired of it. And, I've always been an entrepreneur. I've always had a side hustle of some type since I was like 10 years old. So
really,
it was about time for me to just make the plunge. I wasn't getting any younger. So I thought I'd set my sights on, going that route. And then once I made that decision, then the challenging part came, which was, finding out what exactly I wanted to do.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. Entrepreneur at heart, but, spent years in corporate. What was the thing that made you actually, take the leap like that? You're like, okay, I'm doing this. This is what I'm doing. Because there's a lot of people out there, the same thing. They're kind of don't like this corporate world or whatever they're doing, but they don't take the leap. Like, what was it that caused you to make that decision?
Yeah, honestly, I don't know why it took me so long, because I just kind of felt dead inside, just going, working these jobs. I just wasn't, you're not building anything. You're not contributing. You're not generating jobs. You're just a cog in the machine. And I never felt comfortable with that, but it was always just kind of, I'm a numbers guy. I'm a finance guy. Get a nice job at a bank after college, and just kind of make my way up, get to MD, and that was kind of always the path in my head. But just burning in the back of my brain, all these different side hustles I had. I don't know why it took me so long to actually make this a full-time thing. But, the trigger to make the leap was honestly, it was around the layoffs, pretty significant. The bank cut headcount by like 20%. And
wow,
I hated the feeling of just not being in control of my future. Like, regardless of the quality of my work, just the fact that, some McKinsey consultant was, deciding my fate, who doesn't really know what I did. And, it bothered me. And that was kind of the catalyst to get me to get off my butt and do something.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I mean, just not having the control and feeling like someone could, end your what you're doing now, your career, and just like that. Makes a lot of sense to want to have control of your own fate. Okay, so you didn't start out by looking at franchises, right? I believe you started looking for local businesses to buy. What was that process like?
Yeah, it's fun. It's one thing I love to do is just, read over P&Ls and balance sheets and just analyze businesses. And it was honestly, it kind of became a hobby of mine. And, I just read over hundreds and hundreds and just evaluating, what was successful, what was not successful. Even if I had no interest in buying that specific business, I'd be looking at their financials. Maybe it would make sense for me to start a business of my own in that industry. So, I was collecting everything I could, but I did have a sincere interest in finding one to acquire. It just never came. And I got a little impatient. I don't know, it was probably 9, 12 months, I was going through that ETA process, and, I found some good ones, got close a couple times, but, I just never found that one. They're certainly out there, and maybe if I waited a little bit longer, but I didn't find it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. I mean, there's a lot of people also, looking to buy an existing business. ETA is a big thing right now. What was it that didn't end up working for you? With each of these ones that seemed like they might have been a good fit. Was it were you get someone else they got a better offer, or you just what boxes were not getting checked for you?
So the real, like, the diamonds were, I was beat out by private equity pretty quickly on a couple of them. Those were the real cream of the crops that I was excited about. And then there were a couple others where, they were good businesses, but I did feel like I was settling. I'm thinking of this one. I was pretty close to acquiring a Moroccan day spa. And it was
Wow, okay.
It was a fantastic business. Everything checked out, and it got me. I just love business, and it got me going, and reading the documents. But then I sat back, and once I said it out loud a couple times, I realized maybe there's a better fit for me out there. So it was finding that balance of something that you can become passionate about. And because at the end of the day, owning a business is all sales. You're selling something, right? You're selling yourself, you're selling your service, you're selling your product. And, I love sales. I'm a good salesperson, but I have to believe in the product. And, I don't know how much I could truly care about, selling Moroccan day spa, selling 60-minute Moroccan massages. So it's just finding that balance of good business and something that, you can become passionate about.
Got it. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I like the way you frame that. So how did you end up turning on to franchising and looking at franchise concepts? What was that process like?
I started to, as every aspiring entrepreneur has, they have their notes, right, where they're just writing everything down, writing all the ideas out. And, I played some out a little bit. My first step was always, let's try to sell it. And then, if we get some sales, if we get some genuine interest, then we can try to build a business around it. And I got some traction with a few things, but there was nothing that, for the lack of a better phrase, would make me wealthy, would make me, have enough financial freedom to quit my job. It was all, everything that actually got traction was, it was basically a side hustle, and I couldn't justify it too much more. So I never got something off the ground too quickly. So then I started looking, franchising was always on my radar. I appreciated the, sense of, starting on first or second base, getting all the administrative stuff out of the way so you can just focus on selling. You can get what I call non-revenue generating activities, which, as someone who starts a business, you can spend hundreds of hours doing stuff that is just, technically you should do and you will have to do, but if you spend your first few hundred hours doing it, you're not going to build a business. Like, you got to sell things. So, stepping into a franchise, and they have that all ironed out, you kind of get the playbook, you get the CRMs all set up, you get the task list on what to do to, make yourself legal and get your licenses and all that fun stuff. And then, it increased my time for me to hit the streets and start actually selling.
So how did you end up with Cabinet IQ then? What was it about Cabinet IQ that stood out?
Yeah, so I spoke to tons of franchises. There's some really good ones out there. There's some really poor ones, for sure. What got me with Cabinet IQ, there's a few things. One, it is, the leadership team. I really believed in them. I was franchisee number 7, which was the perfect spot for me. I wanted to, because I still wanted control over my brand. I wanted to build a business my way. I didn't want to just buy a job. So the ability to help build a brand and, have founders and the corporate team, behind your back, actually listening to your feedback and being there with you and really playing a part in building the brand, that was important to me. So that was one. Most importantly, it was a business that worked. It was a business that could scale. The economics made sense. It was, a lot of franchises out there, you're working with, those royalties, they can hurt, right? If you're working off 15, 20% gross margins, those royalties will eat into it quickly. So, in order to justify a franchise, in order to justify that 6, 7, 8%, whatever the franchise charges, then you have to have a business that can support that. And this was certainly one of them. And I was drawn to the ability to scale within a single territory instead of just, having 100 units of something. I could build a really special business, a big business like in my local market. So all those things kind of played a factor. And, it was something that, like I alluded to earlier, I wanted something I could really sink my teeth into and believe in. And that's when my best salesperson comes out, when it's something when it's a product or service I believe in. And It was something I could see myself really getting into. And I love it.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Okay, so for those who don't know, what is Cabinet IQ? What do you do for your clients, and how do you impact the lives of your clients?
Sure. So we are kitchen design, cabinets, and countertops. So we are a full service cabinet shop. So when you go to remodel your kitchen, typically in most markets, you kind of have two options. You can go to the big box store. You can go to Lowe's, Home Depot, IKEA, and you get your kitchen. They'll sell you basically a kitchen in a box. Or you can go to, Chuck in a truck down the street who has some cabinet doors in the back of his truck, and, you don't know what you're getting. And, a lot of the quote unquote custom shops in local markets, we like to call them homemade rather than custom. It's kind of the same experience as, just regular Joe handyman. So we are that much needed service in the middle, right? Someone who wants a white glove experience, someone who wants a true kitchen design, and a team that's going to have your back from, the initial concept to, that final punch list, and seeing the project through. We're not a shop where you go in, you buy cabinets and, say, okay, they'll be there and, April 15th, good luck. Good luck finding an installer. You never see pictures, you never see how it turns out. And if you don't see the end product, then you don't really care about the end product. So the fact that we are involved through and through, and we get to see clients' faces when we completely transform their home and the most important room in their home, it's truly a rewarding experience. But that was a long answer. Cabinets, countertops, kitchen design, and full service with installation.
That's fantastic. And I having been through a couple different remodels myself, I can certainly attest to, the quality of both cabinets and installation, and the service provided can vary so greatly in this industry. I mean, the bar is just so low as far as service goes, getting people just to respond to you, get back to you, and, communication can be really bad, and follow through and all of those things. I know how bad contractors can be, which is why I love this space for a company that can, be that shining star, of service and communication and doing things the right way, which is what it seems like Cabinet IQ does. It sounds, I believe you opened, talk to us about the time frame from when you signed, the business and when you officially opened, like your showroom, for example. Because I know you're required to have a showroom for this business. So what that looked like and kind of what happened in between.
Sure. Yeah, that's an important part. So a lot of people will be spurned by, the whole retail component, right? They don't want that. They just want to get a van. So the showroom, to answer your question, I signed in April 24. My first showroom opened in April 25, and my second showroom is opening April 26. And the third, I'll have hopefully number 3 and number 4 open by the end of the year here. So what in between?
Shouldn't they be April 27th and April 28th? That's not.
I'll do one. Hopefully number 5 is April 27. But I want to go a little quicker than that now that I know what I'm doing. Yeah. So what happened in between, and that's a really important part, and that's probably what. If you ask the guys over at corporate, then it's probably what separates the best franchisees is the ones that don't wait for the showroom, because it is a fantastic tool, don't get me wrong, and it's necessary to build a large business. But you can build this business without one, with one in progress. You're kind of that Chuck in the truck that I was just talking about. You do have some cabinet doors in the back of your truck, but you're going to do some in-home measures, and you're definitely approaching it in a way that, this Chuck would not, you're bringing some tech to it. You're bringing, a smile. You're going to answer the phone. You're bringing some just customer service, but you can absolutely sell, kitchens without a showroom. Now it'll be hard to sell to like homeowners because then you don't really have any differentiation, but you can sell to, builders and designers. They don't really care if you have a showroom. They care about quality service, quality product, and they want a good partner because it is, and when you build a home, cabinets are arguably one of the most important parts of building that home. And if you build a beautiful $2 million new build and the cabinets are just, RTA particle board, they're falling apart, the install was wrong, it's going to reflect very poorly on that builder. And finding a good cabinet guy it's hard, because it's a hard business. The bar is low because it is truly a challenging business to operate and to execute successfully. Just a single kitchen, there's thousands of numbers that go into a single kitchen, and all of them have to be exact to the 8th or 16th for that to, be executed properly. One wrong number can just cause a domino effect that will throw the whole thing off. So the attention to detail, the organization involved in, actually executing a kitchen remodel, it's underappreciated, and that's why the bar is so low, because a lot of people try it and a lot of people are just not detail oriented enough. They don't have, you kind of use left brain, right brain in terms of, design, math, execution. A lot of people just don't have the skill set, and that's kind of why the opportunity is there for the people that do.
Quick pause here. Ryan felt empty in the corporate world. In a year after opening his own franchise, he's running a $3.5 million business. If you're ready to find the right franchise for you, book a call at athletetoowner.com/ready. Now let's get back to Ryan. Is this business, so you mentioned two things. One, you've got the residential consumer side of things. And then earlier you mentioned being able to sell to, work with builders and designers and such, more like B2B. So is it kind of split, this business, or do you tend to focus on one more than the other?
So you probably get a different answer asking the different Cabinet IQ franchisees. For me at this point, it's just about 50-50. Now it evens out that, revenue probably skews higher for builders, trade partners, but volume skews higher for homeowners, just because a lot of the builders and designers we work with, we're doing full homes, and those are larger tickets. But, it kind of evens out to 50-50. It fluctuates, but really it doesn't get more than 60-40 at any given time. Now, before that showroom opens, you're going to be heavily skewed on builders and contractors, and that's okay. That's your only chance at really, recurring revenue in this business. That is one of the challenges. But that said, we've had a lot of homeowners that, we did their laundry room, then we did their bathroom, and okay, now they trust us, we'll do their full kitchen, right? There's opportunities there for sure. But your best chance, recurring revenue is your trade partners that are doing, 6-15 homes a year. And, there's a lot of opportunity there. But yeah, it's about 50-50 for my business, but I bet the different franchisees have different answers.
I do like the diversification there in that you can do both. And, especially, like you said, starting out, you kind of have to go the business to business route, and which forces you to start those relationships, which seems like it's very important because, like you just said, like the recurring revenue part, it's nice to have some of that component to your business. So that's a great way to be forced to start that way, I think, but then also have, this the direct to consumer, residential side as well. Seems like a great model to have the mix.
Yeah, it is. It de-risks it a little bit, but yeah, it's healthy.
So what does the business look like now, or take me through, from what your business looks like from that first year to, your second year, as far as like, what does your team look like? What does your day-to-day look like? How's that different?
Yeah. My day-to-day is still, it's a firestorm. I'm just on the phone constantly, and you're solving a lot of problems. And, that's why it's important to, surround yourself with capable people who care, who have a sense of ownership. But, I feel like I'm always hiring. Just today, right before I got on this podcast, I got done with 8 phone interviews, just 15 minutes apiece. But I'm always hiring for multiple positions. Every week I'm trying to trying to do 15 interviews, just phone interviews, and then I'll get them in person. But yeah, my team is, so I have some offshore assistants that help, and I have a couple remote employees, but altogether we're about 20 strong right now. And that's in my Bluffton, Hilton Head market. And then, I'm expanding to other markets where I'm going to have to build out the team there as well. But yeah, we're growing rapidly. I still feel like we're understaffed, which is crazy, but we're getting that.
Wow, that's incredible. Because just given how long you've been in business, it has not been that long. That is rapid growth. Do you mind sharing with us what the revenue looked like for that first year, and kind of what things are tracking towards?
Yeah, I did about 3.5 my first year, and
that is incredible.
Thank you. And this year's goal is, I'd like to say 6. We're not on track for 6 right now, so in the 5s, but it's heavy reinvestment into growing, into expanding into new territories, into building new showrooms, into expanding the team. It's all being reinvested right now. But you could certainly build a great business in your one market with one showroom and a team of 5 or 6, and you can make a great living doing that. And like I said, it is truly a rewarding career too.
That's amazing. I mean, I gotta say, for most businesses, it's just impossible to do so quickly, in really any business. Especially like a franchise business, when you think about just like, what one territory can do. And of course you have, multiple territories now, and you're still, continuing to expand. But yeah, it's unbelievable. And I think that, the high average ticket that you get from working in this industry, and working in kitchens and home builders and that sort of thing just really lends itself to, potentially a very large business. That's amazing. Congrats.
Thank you. Now you do have to be, operationally tight. It sounds like a big number, and it is. And I'm proud of myself, proud of the team, but, in this business, it's not uncommon for, a random Tuesday, someone makes a $12,000 mistake. It is, It's a common thing. And, high incoming numbers come with high outgoing numbers too, especially like I said, at the rate I'm reinvesting. But, you can mess things up pretty quickly. And what looks like a profitable job, you can absolutely lose money in the blink of an eye. And just like I said, there's over 1,000 numbers that you have to deal with on a single kitchen. And if one of those is wrong, if the wrong one is wrong, then, it can be a 5-figure mistake, no problem.
Ooh, it's a very good point. Very good way to balance that out. High reward, but also, you got that risk component too can be pricey. Good point. Okay, so let's go back to when you first started. Most people, I guess I'll just say, you've done what most people would prefer to do in a dream world, which is to be able to keep an existing corporate job while you're simultaneously, starting a business, with the idea that eventually you'd leave a corporate job, but not wanting to do so until you've made enough money, in this new business. How did that work out for you? And I guess I should say, how has that been working out for you?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I mean, it takes a good situation. You got to set yourself up for it. You can't get away with that working for a small business or but in the corporate America world, and especially in this remote world that we're in, I mean, it's certainly feasible. Not every job, you kind of have to know how to play the game. If you've advanced in corporate America a few times, you probably have a good sense of, how to play the game, what actually matters, at the end of the day. And my perspective is, if my manager's happy, then, I'm in a good spot. And so, I try to do everything I can to make my manager happy. And, it's, the corporate world, there's we talk about low bar. Once you start a business, once you operate a business, you don't realize how easy, those jobs were, and how little stress. You shut your laptop at the end of the day, 5, 6, 7 o'clock, it doesn't even matter. It's not 3 a.m. You're not going to sleep just worrying about making payroll and, the million tasks on your to-do list. And, you do have it pretty nice. And, I kind of romanticize it now, but, I don't miss it at the same time. It's a weird balance. But, it is. Yeah, to answer your question, it takes a special situation. You got to set yourself up for success, hopping around different roles, different companies, having grace periods within all those, certainly has helped. But, you got to play the cards are dealt, right? And it's possible for some people. It's not possible for others.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. It depends on the situation and, that any particular individual is in. For cabinet IQ, let's say someone is thinking about doing that or wants to try. What would you say is really like the minimum amount of time they need to spend in the business, in the cabinet IQ business to be successful?
You don't want me answering that question. I work unhealthy hours. I'm not exaggerating. I work probably 120-hour weeks. Now it's not a requirement. It's, I haven't slept really in the past 2 years. That is not a requirement. I'm a bit of a psycho. I'm, like I said, I'm impatient and I go all in with things. But honestly, a minimum amount to be successful, I mean, no less than 80 hours a week. I don't even know how it would be possible, if you actually want to grow. But, because it's a learning curve, especially if you come from corporate banking and you start a kitchen design firm, you have a lot to learn. I had to learn kitchen design, cabinets, countertops, construction, how to operate a business, how to manage people. All of these, cabinets in themselves. I mean, you can spend, it's a career for people. It's a lucrative career. For your best kitchen designers in your market, they're making a great living because it's hard. And you can spend, 30, 40 years of your career and still, be learning a new thing every day about cabinets. Because, you got to think there's cabinets, but there's also the lines that you're working within, right? I have 17 different cabinet lines. All of them do a million different things. You have to know all of them. You have to be able to, put your customer in the right cabinet line. And as I found on onboarding new people, it's a lot harder than I anticipated. I just dove right in and learned everything I possibly could in that time between, selling a franchise agreement and, you're not educated enough to sell yet. You still got a lot of stuff to do. So I just dove right in and just was a sponge and listened to all the podcasts, read all the books, just reading spec books at night. But you have to put in the time on the front end for sure. And, running the business, hopefully I can get to a more manageable workload soon. But, it's there. Like I said, you can build a comfortable business, but if you want to build a large business, you got to put in the work.
Yeah. If you want to build something as big as quickly as you have, I mean, that is the growth that you have had in the last 2 years is unbelievable, and I guess that's here I now understand why you put a lot of work into it, and which is great.
Yeah, there's no shortcut from more hours. I'm not going to be the smartest guy. I'm not going to be the quickest guy, but if I put in more hours, I'm basically adding another year or two of work into 1 year. I'm just kind of trying to condense it and, just straight outwork people is what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it seems like even if I guess you had more of a normal person, they're working closer to normal, maybe hours, could still be successful and have a great business, but just maybe not get there as to your level as quickly, I guess. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's a fair statement for sure. But also if you show me a business owner in the first 2-3 years that are working 40 hours a week, I'll show you a liar. I don't think they exist. It's not possible to work 40 hours a week. I think 80 is probably a good number to answer your question. But yeah, absolutely. You can be comfortable and you can build a business slowly and have a really comfortable life and enjoy what you do. And not be an insane person like me.
So when we spoke last, you mentioned, athletics were a big part of your life growing up. How does that show up in, how you run the business now?
The ability to show up every day and work, and work as part of a team towards a larger goal. That sounds kind of cliche coming out of my mouth, but, I think that athletes become leaders for a reason. And, I wasn't some great athlete, but I played sports growing up. I still play sports, and it teaches you a lot. One is competition. I hate to lose. That goes a long way. But one is I play golf. That's my sport now, and a good golfer has a tremendous amount of discipline and the fortitude and the ability to show up every day and work. And sometimes you realize progress isn't linear. In golf specifically, right? Some days you'll go hit 150 balls and you're worse than you were when you showed up. But, you show up every day, you hit 150 balls, then, you're going to look back in 6 months and you're going to see how much you progressed. So, there's a lot of parts of, just being an athlete in general. Like I said, being part of the team competition and just working towards a larger goal. But, athletics teaches you a lot of invaluable skills.
I wholeheartedly agree. It makes a lot of sense. I love that. So for someone that is sitting in a corporate job right now out there, listening to this on their way home, thinking about, making their next move, what advice would you give to someone that's contemplating getting into franchising?
Yeah. One, I'd say, again, cliche, but bet on yourself. You don't want to ask the what if question 20, 30 years down the road. If you were wired like that, and, chances are if, you're listening to podcasts and you're this deep in the, the search process, you're probably wired like that. You have something in your brain that, you want more, you yearn for more. And, if you are that type of person, then, you don't want to be sitting back 20, 30 years and asking, what if I did that? And, it's a liberating feeling. It's incredibly stressful. It's incredibly hard, but it's liberating. You work for yourself. You don't report to anyone except your clients who are calling you constantly, but you know what I mean? Just go find the right brand, find something that you believe in. Don't just sign with anything. There's a lot of good actors, a lot of bad actors in space, a lot of just middle ground where, we're not sure where the upside is, or you don't love what you do, or, find the one that works for you. Find something that you can become passionate about. At the end of the day, if you're in this space, you're probably looking to make some money. So find something that actually makes economical sense. And, with the royalties that are involved in franchising, that's a whole other consideration, and it's a different approach than finding business through ETA. So, find something that works, find something that you're passionate about, find a brand that you truly believe in, the leaders you believe in. And, that looks different for everyone. A lot of people can probably be passionate about owning a bunch of Jimmy Johns. Some people will be passionate about, cleaning windows or landscaping or, what have you. It looks different for everyone. And, those businesses are fun because you're out in the sun every day. And, you can build like a nice family business. You can get your son out and, when they're young, start working. It looks different for everyone. But, find something that works for you and find a business that works in your market. I said it before, that's probably the most overlooked part of the franchise due diligence process is, a business can work in market X and it will completely fail in market Y. And you got to analyze why. What are the demographics, or, what makes that market work for that business, and see if it translates to your market. So I encourage people to explore that specific part of the due diligence process just as much as they would explore, evaluating the brands themselves, because it is just as important, if not more.
Makes sense. Makes complete sense. Well, Ryan, I appreciate you sharing your words of wisdom with us today. And, congrats on all the success that you've had in the business. You do need to get some more sleep, though. So
that's what my wife says.
But yeah, congrats on everything. I appreciate you being here, and congrats on being a franchise champion.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Ryan's story is a great reminder that the path to ownership isn't always obvious. He spent over a year trying to buy an existing business and couldn't find the right fit. Franchising gave him a business he loves, a proven model, and a support system built in from day one. If you're in a corporate role wondering what's next, I can help you find your version of that. I work with driven professionals to identify the specific franchise that fits your skill set, your financial goals, and your lifestyle goals. And I do it at no cost to you. Book a quick intro call using the link in the show notes, or head to athletetoowner.com/ready. I'm Alan Regala, helping you become a franchise champion. See you in the next one.